Welcome to SIG Apps. It's Monday, May 8th, 2017. I keep saying every week we have a fun agenda, but we really do have a fun agenda this week. I'm going to do a little history lesson on SIG Apps and kind of talk about what we've done for the past year and what we want to do going forward. And so that'll be the first 10 to 15 minutes. And then we'll hear from Vic. He's going to take us through some example patterns for charts. So I'm pretty pumped about that. Does anybody have anything else they want to add to the agenda at this time? Okay, I'll take silence as a no, and I'll present. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So SIG Apps is almost 1 year old. So I wanted to take this opportunity, like I said before, to reflect and talk about where we've come or how far we've come and where we're going to go. So story time. Last year on May 9th, a few of us got together and decided we wanted to consolidate a few other SIGs, and we wanted a place to talk about running and managing apps on Kubernetes. So if there were any tools that we needed to do that, or any features that we wanted improvements for, or features we wanted to add to Kubernetes for that, this was the place to discuss that. And so I think that meeting consisted of Matt Farina, Clayton Coleman, Antoine Legrand, Sebastian, I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name. I think Sarah dropped in for a little bit. I was there, and Matt Butcher was there. And I'm sorry if I missed someone, but I think that was the group. And so we all agreed. We kind of set a few guidelines, and we're like, okay, let's do this thing. And so May 18th, we had the first SIG Apps meeting. And since then, we've had 42 SIG Apps meetings. I counted this morning. 2 of them were in person. We've had 42 technical demos. And plenty of discussions and presentations and surveys. And up until now, SIG Apps has been the place to understand how to define, install, and manage applications in Kubernetes. We've been talking about higher level tools that we use in our everyday experience with this stuff. We use this place to keep up with Kubernetes workloads, features, and improvements. We use it to provide feedback on the app's experience. And this is meant to be the friendly place to start, or a friendly place to start your Kubernetes journey. And I'm pretty proud of that last bullet point. SIG Apps is also home to the workloads, features, and improvements. So most notably Stateful Set. That was the first thing that we talked about at the very first SIG Apps meeting. I think Prashant gave us a demo, and that was a big focus for several weeks after that. Helm has been under the SIG Apps umbrella. There was the Helm 2.0 release in November of 2016, and it also graduated in February 2017 from the incubator process. And Compose is almost there too. That got incubated in September of last year, and is probably close to graduation. We should probably check on that. App Controller. I mean, we saw App Controller from its first POC into now the integration with Helm that's going on with Rudder. We've seen demos of KPM and Antoine's efforts there. And we've even seen a POC of CNR up until its transition to App Registry, which was released officially at KubeCon in March. And also, the official charts repository has grown quite a bit too, from its creation to now hosting 70 stable charts, 9 incubator charts, and over 70 open pull requests for new and improved charts. So that's a big deal. I just want to take a second and thank you all for your hard work, commitment, persistence, feedback, and collaboration. It's really cool to see, especially for me, to see how far we've come in this particular SIG. So going forward, we'll continue doing all of the fun things that we've been doing so far, like the demos and discussions. Continue providing feedback on this app's experience. We'll continue talking about tooling. We'll continue helping the workloads team out and having them come to us as well. And this, I would be very proud if this continued to be a friendly place to start the Kubernetes journey. And also I want to take some time to say we should also iterate. So for the past year, it felt like drinking from the fire hose. You know, I think a lot of us can relate, or just a lot of us were coming to the SIG to keep up with like the new tool that got built like last week, and for doing X, Y, and Z. And so this is a good place to keep up with what was going on. But I think what's happened, at least what I've observed, is things have slowed down a little bit. And people in the community want to have more conversations around best practices and kind of share their experiences, since they haven't just done, a particular thing just once or twice. You know, people have been running Kubernetes in production for a while. They have processes now, things that they do with their teams, and that work for them. So I think this could be a really good place to have more conversations around those best practices. Something that I've also noticed is we have different levels of people in this meeting. So we have folks who are working on Kubernetes, working on actual Kubernetes features, to people who just started learning about Kubernetes and want to deploy their first app. So setting a good context around having each demo and each discussion is really important. Just 1 second.
Excuse me, if you're not talking, could you please mute?
Okay, thank you. So I've been in the background kind of trying to figure out how you set more context, how do you set the right context on these demos and discussions. But I think that that's something that I just wanted to share with all of you, that that's something that I'm thinking about. And if you have any ideas around that, that's very much welcome. So let's all be kind of aware of that and be more empathetic to those personas. And I'd also like to make our processes better. So that might mean more working groups instead of long discussions here, with good feedback loops and follow-up conversations. And also, as always, more detailed notes. So thus far, our team has been Matt Farina and I as co-leads. But I want to definitely give a shout out to Clayton and Eric Toon, who have been super essential and like supporting and championing this SIG on the Kubernetes side. And so things have grown quite a bit, and to help us with the product management sort of focus of the Kubernetes development that is housed under this SIG, we've added to the team Antoine and Dan, and so those efforts are much appreciated, and of course all of you. But this scope has been, or this particular SIG scope has just grown so much. Matt and I were talking about how we should deal with this, and we couldn't think of any way better other than to add a new co-lead. So I just want to take a second to welcome Adnan Abdulzain from Bitnami. We asked Adnan to help us run and organize these meetings and help us manage these responsibilities, since the scope has grown quite a bit. For those of you who don't know, Adnan has been a charts repo maintainer and lead for quite a bit. Him and Vic started this effort off, I think, in August of last year. And they've grown the team from 2 to 7 maintainers in 9 months, which is huge. And Adnan has lots of experience with running different types of apps on Kubernetes. I think I'm really excited to have him on board, and he's also just a pleasure to work with. So I'll just pass it off now to Adnan for a second to introduce himself and say a few words if you want.
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm excited for the applause I'm getting. I've kind of been in the SIG Apps community for a bit. I think since it started, really. I've been around, so I've personally seen it grown from what it was to what it is now. And I'm really excited to work with Michelle, Matt, and all the other great guys who've brought it this far, and take it to the next level, really.
Awesome, thank you. So look forward to seeing him leading some meetings and growing the conversation as well. I think Adnan actually did one of the first demos in SIG Apps as well, if I'm not mistaken. Okay.
Yeah, it was an awesome to-do app.
You got to start somewhere. So, so if you're interested in moderating SIG Apps meetings, Matt and I and Adnan will take all of the help we can get, and I'm sure you're sick and tired of hearing our voices every single week. So if you want to moderate, if you're interested in doing that, just reach out. This is everybody's SIG. There's not really like a hierarchy or anything like that here. You just do whatever you want, lead whatever effort you want. And that's something that I'm really excited to do as well. Instead of moderating all the time, having Adnan jump in will help me get some time to do less of the organizing and more of like leading some of these efforts that I'm so passionate about personally. So yeah, let me know if you're interested in moderating. Other notes, we'll move all of the meeting minutes from 2016 into a new document soon. I don't know if you've noticed, but the Google Doc we have has been slower and slower about loading up. So we're just going to follow the same practice as the Kubernetes community meeting and put all of the old notes in a new document and link that in the repo. Also, please help us take better notes. You're welcome to take notes. You're welcome to put them in line. That agenda is open to everyone to edit. I think, oh yeah. And I'm looking forward to another fast, exciting, and collaborative year with you all. So that's my small spiel under 15 minutes. Does anybody have any questions or anything they'd like to say right now?
I'll speak up. This is Matt. And so I'll just say thanks for putting this together. A year has gone by quickly, and it's nice to sit back and reflect on what has happened, because when you look at it week to week, sometimes you don't realize everything that's going on. But when you get a chance to look at it over a longer period of time, you get a different view, which is nice. And it's good to celebrate that and to focus on moving forward. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay, so with that, I'll hand it off to Vic. All right, so we'll go out of sappy mode into let's talk about Hallman Charts. So Helm is a Kubernetes package manager. Charts is the package. A chart is the package format. Vic and Adnan and several others have been leading the charts effort and been around for a while, and so they understand these charts best practices, and I'm really excited for them to share what they've learned today. So go for it, Vic.
Thanks. Can you guys hear me and see my screen?
Yep, to both.
Great. Yeah, and I just want to call out, our SIG Apps leaders. They've been kicking ass for a long time, and I just really appreciate carrying everything forward and keeping us on track and getting us interesting content. It's been really awesome being in the community. So thank you. So my name is Vic. I've been working with charts and in the curation of charts for the last 6 to 8 months and seen a lot of patterns come and go. And I just wanted to show what we've seen in the community and what things we see recurring and what things we consider as best practices now in charts. So we'll go through some chart structure and things within certain files, and then we'll look at some tips and tricks. And then after that, I kind of want to open it up and see if anybody has some things that I missed that we think are more solidified as chart best practices. So the chart structure, we have the chart YAML, the values file, a README, requirements, and then templates. So we'll go through these in turn. So the chart YAML, we've got all the metadata about what your chart is, where it comes from, the version, who maintains it, and an icon that we want to use for the kubeapps.com website, which we'll look at in a second. So here, the description, it's important to have something more than just this is the chart for thing that this is a chart for. Really say what kind of chart it is or what kind of application it is. This is searchable when you do a Helm search, so you can actually look at what things apply to certain keywords in there. Also having the sources up to date, so if you're using some sort of custom image or something like that, make sure that you point to where that image is so people can reproduce whatever you're using. And then an icon, like I said, will show up in Kube Apps, makes your app look pretty in the catalog there. And then your maintainer, so we know where to reach out if we have a question or need to ping you on an issue. Usually it's pretty evident from the Git commits on the chart, but it's also helpful to have a reference Within your values file, this is where you kind of define the API for your chart. I think that's the easiest way to think of the values file. Your users are going to use this file to configure the application. So you want to give them all the knobs they need in order to properly configure it for whatever their use case may be. Usually we see these start out pretty slim, and as people use your chart, you're going to see that they want different things to be configurable. So one of the things that we've been promoting as a best practice in the charts or in the values file is that you have a lower camel case set of variables. So from address, for example, that's kind of the pattern we've seen most, and we're seeing some of the older charts transition to that over the next little while. Additionally, making sure that all of the images are configurable. So if someone does want to customize one of the images that you're using in your deployments, you can give them the knob to use a custom image or update the image to the latest. Additionally, making sure that you can configure the repository for the image and the version. Some charts originally have just the chart or the image version configurable, which makes it a little hard to customize things. One other thing that we appreciate is having lots of comments in your values file. It tells people how to interact with these values and what things they can and should change. Then we have a Readme. So the Readme is what's going to show up in kubeapps.com. And it allows people to kind of get a little deeper look at what kind of config values you have. Sometimes has install instructions and stuff like that. And here in Kube Apps, we also see that we have the icon that we provided in our chart YAML. Another thing you're going to have in your chart is if you have any dependent charts that you need in order for your application to work, you're going to have a requirements YAML. And this requirements YAML is going to point at a version of some other chart that lives in the repository. One thing that you can do is have a conditionally installed dependency. So here in this chart, I have Minio for object storage as a dependency by default, but I can also disable that if I'm going to use some other object storage. So maybe I can use Google Cloud Storage or S3 rather than Minio. And the way you configure that is to add a condition on the requirement. And then in your values file, you can have a value that enables or disables that piece of the deployment, which is pretty cool. So you don't have to deploy things that you no longer need. In the templates folder, you're going to have all the things that you need to template. Generally, these are deployments and ingresses and services that are going to make up your application. We prefer to have things separated out into their individual files. Some charts, PRs come in with 5 services in one file. We prefer to have them separate. It's just easier for debugging and looking at these things as we review them. Another thing you're going to have in your templates file, other than just Kubernetes templated manifests, is a notes.txt. And this is really kind of the first documentation that you're going to give the user of your chart. It's the instructions for what they can do next. This can be templatized, and it gets printed out after your chart is installed. So the user will do a Helm install, my chart, and then they'll see information about what they can do to interact with the application that they installed. And this is really important for usability. And the more information and the clearer the information is in these notes, the more likely you are to have a successful installation and usage of your chart. So we've seen the most popular charts have really good notes, and people tend to be able to interact with them very quickly. So what I do here in this chart, which is for Spinnaker, which is a continuous delivery tool, I say how to connect to it via port forward and then where to go in the UI. Once you've done that, you can kind of interact with Spinnaker, but then I also point to the main docs for Spinnaker and Kubernetes so that you have an idea of what kind of things you can do with Spinnaker. Now I'll move on to just some tricks that I've seen people do, or kind of usability hacks for making sure that their charts are usable. One thing that I find very useful as I'm iterating through creating charts and updating my charts is to have the deployments update on config change. So a lot of charts have one main config, maybe it's a config map or a secret, So you can add a checksum into an annotation of your deployments, and using the Sprig template, the SHA-256 sum. And that'll basically run your config file, which in my case is a config map called spinnaker config.yaml, through a SHA-256 sum, which will add that as an annotation. And then every time you update the config and reinstall using Helm, it's going to update that annotation with a new SHA sum. And so that's going to then roll out that change to your deployment. So every time your config changes, your deployment is going to update the pods for that. And I find that super useful. One thing I do in this particular case is to set the strategy to rolling update with max of unavailable is 0. So every time a change rolls out to one of these components, it's going to wait until the new pod is up, ready, and ready to serve traffic before tearing down the old one. So that's a safer way to use this kind of update strategy. Another thing that I've done in a few charts is to have some post-install steps. So maybe I'm uploading some configuration into a web service, or in this case, I'm creating a bucket that I need in my backing store, Minio. So you can use the Helm post-install hooks. Every time you install the chart, it's going to run this particular job and make sure that it completes successfully. So here I'm just running a pod that has the Minio client and running the config for creating the config for Minio and then creating a bucket. So this is just something that needs to happen after my chart is installed and only on the first install. The other types of hooks you can use are post upgrade and post delete. I think there's one or two more. But this is a useful way to have a little bit more control over when things are created inside of your deployment. One other pattern that we've seen pop up, and this one is kind of a more advanced pattern, is you've installed a chart and you want to actually use a persistent volume claim that already exists rather than one that is installed by the chart or created by the chart. This has been seen in the Prometheus chart where this example comes from. So people have used a value that is the existing claim, and if that value exists, they're going to use that claim rather than the claim that's created by the chart. And you can also enable or disable the creation of the persistent volume claim. So this lets you kind of reuse some of your old data if you didn't start by using the original chart. One other one that's more on the reuse of existing resources or in the kind of production use setting is to allow people to configure an ingress for themselves. So here the pattern is to allow an ingress value, which is either enabled or disabled, and then a set of annotations on that ingress. So we'll create the ingress for them and add those annotations that you can configure. One last one that's come up in the last few releases of Helm is to create a functional test. So here in the Jenkins chart, we create a config map that has our script that we want to run as a test. Here we're literally just curling the Jenkins UI, which may not be the most complex test ever, but tells us a lot about whether our deployment has succeeded. So we're just going to curl the Jenkins UI in that script, and we have a pod that is going to run that script as a Helm test. So after we install with Helm install stable Jenkins, we can wait until that's the pods are ready to go, and then we can run Helm test to do a kind of smoke test against our deployment and make sure that all things are as we expect. Lastly, we're trying to support 2 latest versions of Kubernetes. So right now we're trying to support 1.6 and 1.5. So don't use any features that would break the defaults of your chart if someone was running on the latest 2 versions of Kubernetes. And that's not super hard to do, but it does take a little bit of conscious effort looking at the types of features and manifests that you're using. And that's it. Are there any that I missed or that people think are important or emerging patterns?
This looked good. So this is Matt. I've got a couple of questions. First, do you have a link to your slides that we can stick into the meeting?
Yeah, I will get one of those for sure. I finished them 4 minutes before the meeting. So
are they uploaded anywhere? Are they in Google Docs or something like that?
They are, yeah.
Okay, yeah. If you could share them and link them in, that would be fantastic. Also, do you know if there's any kind of write-up that contains this kind of information in any of the docs anywhere?
There is. So in the Helm repository, there is a charts tips and tricks. And I'll link to that in the slides that I share out. And I think we'll have some or most of this in a doc that I'll write in like 30 minutes and put it into the charts repo as well.
Yeah, that would be absolutely fantastic. Because one of the things that I'm struggling with is somebody says, hey, I'm new to Helm. How do I get started with doing my charts the right way? And just, things that we can point people to that say, here's how you can get going. It's just so valuable.
Yeah, and another thing that I've been doing or did early on was make sure that the Helm has a Helm create command that allows you to kind of get the scaffolding for a chart and actually builds a very trivial chart for you. So I'm going to go back around and make sure that all of these things are implemented in that, which I was doing early on, but I took a little break due to the birth of a baby. But yeah, I'll be coming around to making sure that all that stuff is surfaced.
Another exciting thing is that we just added another team member to Helm. His name is Ronan, and he's going to work on making Helm docs prettier and searchable on helm.sh. So we can probably add those best practices on that website as well. You don't have to keep reading markdown files, and you can search through them, and it'll be nice.
Yay.
Awesome. So I have one more thing to present to you guys. Well, actually, Adnan is going to present it. So we're going to move, as chart maintainers, we have 77 charts to maintain now, 79 maybe. That's a lot of stuff to ingest, and as Kubernetes changes, these patterns change ever so slightly. So we're trying to have more of a common base set of patterns that we can reuse in many charts. And Adnan is going to show the commons chart, which we'll try to start implementing over the next little bit of time. So I'll hand it over to Adnan to talk through that.
Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen here. So I think I have talked about the commons chart, or at least the goals of it, in a previous SIG Apps meeting. So this might be familiar to some of you. But as Vic said, it's kind of a place where we want to define these common patterns that we see everywhere and make it a lot easier to update charts when something changes in a new Kubernetes version. So it's in this repository right now in kind of my own namespace and branch, but I think we're planning on moving it at some point to the Kubernetes charts repo. But before that, I'll give a quick demo of how this works. So the idea is that the common chart is a subchart that you would include into your parent chart. So if I open up the Nginx example here and open up requirements.yaml, you can see that it's requiring this common chart, which right now, because it's just on my machine, it's just a local path, but this could be in a repository somewhere. And then when I start writing my templates, all I need to do is, well, basically write a lot less YAML. So for example, here I've got a service, and all I've really needed to define is that this is a service. Here's some stuff that I can override, and it's basically the same, Kubernetes spec that you're used to. But there's a bunch of other stuff that gets filled in using this template, this common.service template, which comes from the common chart. So to show this in action, if I do, oops. So if I go up to the service, you can see there's a bunch of stuff that is pulled in for me that I didn't even have to define. So things that we've seen quite a lot, these labels have always been copied around. This is just going to make it so much easier you don't have to copy around all these labels anymore. You just add any extra labels that you want, and they'll just get merged into these labels from the common chart. And all these things you can kind of override, but by default, it sets it up on port 80. And likewise for the deployment object. So if I show you how that looks like. Again, it's pretty similar. This one's a bit more complex because I'm also including a spec for the container, but the idea is pretty much the same. I also have a more complex example for MariaDB, where you can kind of see some other ideas that we have here with regards to things like environment variables. So providing a kind of helper to make it a lot easier to define an environment variable. So you can just say, common env secret, and just pass it the name of the environment variable and the name of the secret, and same with the values and config map as well.
What templating language is this?
So this is using the Go template language that is baked into Helm already.
Oh, okay, this is a Go template. And then this Go templating, which release of Kubernetes was it done? What was it released?
So this is all baked into Helm. So this is Helm already today will pass your templates through the Go template engine. So really what I'm doing is just leveraging that template engine and writing a bunch of helpers to make this possible. But you could do this without the common chart.
Sounds good.
In fact, there are examples of charts in the chart repo today where people define helpers via a helpers.tpl file that you can then use in other charts. So if you take a look at the chart, a chart in the Kubernetes chart repo, you can see there will often be a helpers.tpl file which defines these helpers. And this is just the common chart basically just defines a bunch of common helpers that we've seen, so you can easily import them into your chart. Another example of something that I wanted to show was this PVC volume. So I have a PVC volume here, but it takes in this values.persistence object. So if you're familiar with how we usually manage persistence in Helm charts, if I go to the values here, there's usually an object that looks a bit like this. So you have persistence, and then you can either enable or disable it, and you can set other options like storage class, the access mode, the size. So with this helper, all I need to do in my deployment is define, I'm using the PVC volume helper, and I give it the object that I want it to use. And then automatically the helper will figure out for me whether it should use a persistent volume claim or not, based on whether that persistence value is enabled or disabled. So by default, persistence is always enabled. So you can see that it's pulling in this persistent volume claim here. But once I set this to false, I get an empty dir. So again, it's just a bunch of kind of common patterns that we've seen that we're trying to extrapolate into this chart, and hopefully also be the place where these kind of best practices are defined and made. Any questions about the common chart?
Does anybody have any questions about Vic's piece or Adnan's piece? Now that we've had some time to think about both. And yeah, somebody said they need some time to digest the common chart, and I totally understand that.
Yeah, actually, so there's in the repository that I showed, which I'll just share here, there's a docs folder, and in there I've kind of described some of the different helpers that are available and how you can use them. So that would be helpful.
Oh, good. Okay, so this seems like even though people aren't speaking up, this seems like a helpful thing. So that's awesome. I'll do one more awkward minute of, does anybody have any questions, and wait. Okay, awesome.
I'll ask a question, I guess.
Go ahead.
Are you with the have you thought about whether or not you're like designing a new API that's like a more succinct version of the Kubernetes APIs when you design the Hallman charts, or are they really just a small set of helpers? Like I saw with a service, you were kind of making a template that's a new, shorter way to define a service.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's very hard to not try and write a DSL, but I think explicitly stated one of the goals of the common chart is to not become a DSL or a different way to define Kubernetes objects. Like it should just be the same, spec that you can write just with pure YAML. It's just kind of an easier way to avoid writing all the boilerplate that you usually have to write. So that's kind of the goal. There is definitely a balance there, I think, that we need to achieve. And some of the stuff that we have there today may not be the right approach. So I think it'd be good to hear feedback on what people think works there and what doesn't work.
Yeah, I think also one of the main goals to start out with is to figure out where the right place to start using something like this is across all the charts. Where do we get the most bangs for our buck, especially as chart maintainers? As for example, 1.7 comes out, and we need to strip out all of the init container, annotations and move them to a different type of init container, in the actual definition, right? How do we leverage this kind of pattern? I don't necessarily think we'll see it widespread to start out. I think it should be used very, very specifically and with a lot of intent. And I think the first use case that it should solve is to solve some maintainer trouble, if there is that.
I'd also like to point out that, one of the reasons we need this, if we're being honest with ourselves, is Kubernetes is hard. When you start getting into the objects and things like that, and you're new and coming in, it can be daunting and hard and complicated. And that's one of those things that for new app developers, new app operators who are coming in to use it, this is hard. And so things that can ease that burden, even if they say, maybe we might be recreating it, or why don't we just use this other thing? If we can lower that barrier to entry, or lower the work to maintain and do some of this, I think it's useful.
Thanks, that made sense.
There's a question in the chat that I wanted to address. So the question is, how far does this overlap with the kubelibs.net stuff or the kubeconfig stuff that's been going on? So I think in some way the concept is similar in that you have a kind of library that you can easily extend from, and ends up with you having to write a lot less. I think right now the goal of the common chart again is to ease some maintainer burden, as Vic said. So right now we're sticking with what we've got, and Helm currently has support for Go templates, so we're trying to do what we can with that. And whether or not in the future we start seeing charts made up of kubelibs.net, I think it would be possible to do something like the common chart using libs.net or JSON.net instead as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Adnan. Thanks, Vic. If nobody has anything else, I'll open the floor for any other discussion topics. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share or ask with the group today?
Yeah, this is Mayank. I wanted to know if for the stateful sets, I see an initial update proposal. I wanted to know when we are thinking of closing that, finalizing it, and then when would we think we can land it? My organization is betting heavily on the upgrade feature, and I would like to help with the implementation if possible, if that would help land it sooner. That's it. Yeah.
So the proposal, we had some conversation offline with respect to how history was going to be implemented. So that proposal is in. We expect to close that out shortly. Stateful set and daemon set are both going to use those. Stateful set update is expected to land in 1.7. Daemon set update history is also targeted for the 1.7 timeframe. You reached out a couple of times in a couple of different channels to offer to help contribute to the implementation. And we're looking at the decomposability of tasking here to see what can be done. Definitely there'll be some, you can make contributions with testing, reviewing, E2E tests. In terms of, I mean, I'm not entirely sure, given the scope of the feature, that it can be composed into multiple independent PRs that can be executed concurrently, right? Like, I mean, it can definitely be decomposed, but the dependencies might be such that you need one PR open in order to make progress on other portions of the work. So I'm looking at how potentially we can make it where we can find concurrency in the implementation or the execution of the implementation. We'll keep you abreast.
Yeah, sounds good. I think we can definitely figure out some way. I mean, I think there can be multiple PRs open, and then there will definitely be merge conflicts.
Right.
But
see, the thing is, right, like the concern is that if we have multiple PRs open and we spend more time reversing merge conflicts than we do implementing code and testing code, then we didn't accelerate the process. We actually made it slower, right? So we don't want to do that either. So we're thinking about where we can find concurrency, and we're going forward with that. And it doesn't make sense to have broken PRs open simultaneously, then try to merge them together, what on a separate branch that we then merge in. But we're looking at it.
sounds good. I'm happy to talk to you offline and see if that works out. Do you think the history proposal is a blocker for that? Like, do you think that should land before this can make progress?
I think we need the implementation of the history in order to make that work, right? So that's the first thing that I'm going to start working on this week. And then from there, it shouldn't be too difficult to actually implement the update. Like, I don't think that the actual implementation is super time consuming. And what it's going to do is figure out how to spell out. So I think we should be able to execute rapidly on it. I don't want to commit to decomposing it into a ton of different tasks if it's not going to add value in terms of helping it land faster, though.
Yeah, sounds good. I think let's. I'll continue to talk to you offline, and if you think we can, I'm still going through your update proposal, and if you think that we can basically divide it, that will be good. If not, that's fine.
Okay.
I'll talk to you offline. Is there a time we can sync up?
Probably tomorrow would be better. We just moved into new offices today, and then I have a few other things I got to do. But we can sync up offline on Slack and set up some time.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayank and Kyle. So does anybody else have anything they'd like to add or share today?
Hi, I have a quick concern. The chart CI is currently testing against Kubernetes 1.5, I think. So is there a way we could update it? Because some of the charts might be using the latest Kubernetes features, which have moved from annotations to the actual pod spec. So is it possible for us to run it against 1.6?
Vic, are you around for that question? I think Vic had to drop off. Adnan, do you have anything on that? Let's follow up with Vic. Dilip, offline. I'll help with that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Okay, if no one has any, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, my connection went weird for a bit.
Nice.
Could you repeat the question?
Philip's asking if the CI for charts can run on 1.6. It's running on 1.5 right now.
Yeah, I think we actually upgraded it to 1.6 last week. So it should be 1.6 now.
Okay, thank you.
I think Vic did that last Thursday.
Can you say what your so that tells us they can use 1.6. It doesn't tell us what the oldest version is that we need to have work, though. Have you guys given thoughts to that?
Yeah, so and actually Vic, I think mentioned it in his slides. So what we want to do is support current and the previous version. So right now that would be supporting 1.5 and 1.6. And we haven't stated this in the README or anywhere in the repo yet, but we should probably be doing that at some point. Make that more clear.
Does that imply that CI needs to do both to kind of make sure we have two versions of compatibility?
So right now we only have the infrastructure set up to test on one version, but yes, ideally at some point we are able to test on both versions.
But would it mean that the chart should be compatible with both 1.5 and 1.6? Wouldn't that make the configuration a little complicated? Because some of the features have been graduated to the pod spec, so we would still have to retain, especially for the new charts, right? I mean, you don't have to use the annotations if you are using the features that are in the spec already.
Yeah, so for example, things like init containers, we still ask that people use the annotations for now, even though 1.6 has the field, just so that is compatible with 1.5. And I think in most cases, so far we've seen, it's a matter of an annotation turning into a field or something like that. Depending on the chart, there may be a reason to specify it as only working on 1.6, and that's actually doable using the Helm chart.yaml. You can actually specify, the minimum version of Kubernetes that this works on. So that may be something we may need to do in the future, but I'm not sure if there are any cases today that would require that.
Is there a way to make fields of a YAML be conditional based on the cluster version it's going to? If you want to use a feature, if it's available, but not if it's not? Yeah,
so there's a capabilities object that Helm adds into the environment that tells you what version of Kubernetes it's being installed in. So you can use that as a condition to decide.
Awesome, thanks.
No worries.
Thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Adnan. That was really helpful. And does anybody else have any questions? Okay, awesome. Then we'll end 10 minutes early. Thanks for your time today and looking forward to seeing you all next week. Have a great week.
Bye, folks.
Bye-bye.